online vigil for Julian Assange. I'm Joe Lauria. I'm the editor-in-chief of Consortium News. And I'm very happy here to be invited by Susie Dawson to kick off this 11-hour vigil or 12-hour vigil. We're going to go until, I think, 11 p.m. Eastern Time. It's 10:30 a.m. here in the Washington, D.C. area. I'm joined by Cathy Vogan. Welcome. How are you, Cathy?
I'm good. How are you? It's very late here again. It's just after midnight.
And where are you exactly?
I'm in Sydney, Australia.
And it's
although I don't sound like an Aussie. They've got one of those international kid accents that live in too many countries. But yeah, it's 12:30 in the morning, and it's getting quite warm now. So we're having nice weather. I've been. I suppose you want to ask what I've been up to next.
Well, let me ask you, tell the audience a little bit about yourself. Tell us about why you're here.
No, they've heard about me 3 times, I think. So, all right, very briefly.
Oh, there are people who've never tuned in before, perhaps.
I just don't like talking about myself all that much. All right, so I'm a Franco-Irish Australian artist living in Sydney, and I have been a WikiLeaks supporter since 2010. And I got involved with people close to WikiLeaks. In fact, Julian Assange's mother was the first person that I met close to WikiLeaks. But I met his father, brother, and started making films in relation to WikiLeaks, and proposed to make a documentary for WikiLeaks. And then back in 2011, it was a cliffhanger every single day. So no time to make a long format documentary. It was kind of everything that came out was news, and it turned into a web series of many different interviews, a bit like the Unity for J thing, except that, I traveled around the world instead of doing this, and met up with, people like, when I went to America, met Noam Chomsky, Daniel Ellsberg, Nozomi Hayase. So I recorded their testimonies. It's a very similar style because it was more like conversation between people who have a common interest in all this, and looking behind the scenes and looking behind the narratives and trying to figure out what's really going on, and also contemplating the benefit of an organization like WikiLeaks with their perfect record of truth-telling. Oh, my goodness, that is gold, and that is something that we need to defend, protect. It was obviously causing a lot of trouble to people whose corruption was being exposed, and people in high places. So lots of people in low places, in grassroots places, but at every level, anybody who had skills should stand up and do whatever they can to defend WikiLeaks. So I made an awful lot of films. I made the WikiLeaks tapes, which was a collection of 24 films with people talking from all around the world. And some of it was actual documentary because I had the time, cameo documentaries, let's say, but up to 20 minutes long. And so all of the, people like John Pilger and Kristinn Hrafnsson and his father, John Shipton, as well. We were all working together back in 2011 onwards here in Sydney, and trying to do the same thing as we are now, stop Julian from being pushed into a precipice, which once again seems surprisingly near. But I've been trying to figure out what the latest drama is all about, what's been happening in Ecuador over the last few days. So yeah, I don't know if have you heard about that as well?
Can you talk about that? Because we had some news yesterday, supposed news, that the Foreign Minister, Jose Valencia Amores, said that Julian's status remains the same inside the the embassy in London, but really, what does that mean?
Well, I mean, why announce it? Why make such a public international announcement to reaffirm Julian's asylum? Because what they were debating in the Ecuadorian Assembly was not even debating, they were taking a vote on whether to scrutinize the process of giving him citizenship. Now, so whether he keeps his citizenship or not has got nothing to do with whether he remains an asylee. And, the idea, it is the rationale, as WikiLeaks have said it, on October 4th, it is being pushed in order to make him easier to extradite to the US over WikiLeaks publications about the Iraq War, State Department and CIA. Bolt 7. Article 79 of the Ecuadorian Constitution forbids extradition of nationals. Once his citizenship is revoked, extradition is easier, but not easy, because you have Ecuador Constitution Article number 41. And this just applies for non-citizens who are applying for citizenship, for asylum, I should say. The state shall respect and guarantee the principle of non-return, right? More technical terms, non-refoulement. In addition to humanitarian and legal emergency assistance. So persons requesting asylum shall not be penalized or prosecuted for remaining in a situation of irregularity. That's Article 41. So Julian is still protected under that. So why should the foreign minister make such a big deal of making this announcement, reaffirming? I suppose it may have been because there was confusion. A lot of people thought that they were voting on whether to revoke his citizenship or not. No, this was just a politician. Her name was Paulo Vintimilla, from the Christian Socialist Party, that had put in a request to the foreign minister a number of times already, but got really quite adamant about it, that they declassify certain documents that were classified by him in relation to the process of giving him citizenship. And we know that a lot of that stuff was very, very private. I am not surprised at all that it was, they had to look at all of the evidence, and a lot of that evidence had not been revealed to the world. So okay, so she's saying that every citizen in Ecuador has the right to see all those documents. That's just rubbish. I mean, that would be a diplomatic issue if all of those documents related with that decision to give him citizenship were revealed. So sorry, I'm kind of getting.
So you're saying even if they revoked his citizenship, wouldn't change his status
as an asylee.
But no, it could still make it easier to extradite him to the U.S. That is key there.
Yeah, that's right. But to open up that dossier, there's probably a lot of things in there that are not intended to be, the basis of him being there. Or maybe it's got something to do with the posts that he was assigned as well. He was given diplomatic status. I don't see why that should be revealed. And even if it is, it doesn't matter. It's not. It may make it easier because it is going to violate their own constitution. A lot of people would get angry if an Ecuadorian citizen was handed over to persecutors. But they have a basic rule anyway. And the Inter-American Court said that every state that is involved in this should do their best to assure his passage, safe passage, and enjoyment, which is the actual word that is used in relation to asylum, to his destination in Ecuador. So I really don't understand why it was.
Do you know anything about the citizenship law in Ecuador? In other words, they're looking at the process that he became a citizen, whether there are any violations of that. Is there, for example, maybe he had to spend a couple of years or some time inside Ecuador to get citizenship, and he obviously didn't do that. you know what exactly they're looking at in terms of the citizenship law?
Well, actually, the Ecuador embassy is
Territory.
Ecuador territory. Yes.
Legally, yes.
So he did spend time in Ecuador. He spent 6 years in Ecuador, technically speaking. But I was just technically speaking. So I was also reading Article 66 of the Ecuador Constitution. I've read it all before, but a long time ago, back in 2012, I think. But Article 66 is very interesting. So that's the right to personal well-being. So for the moment, he is still an Ecuador citizen. So he is entitled to bodily, psychological, moral, and sexual safety. There's a lot of other things here, but going down to Article number 6 is very significant. The right to voice one's opinion and express one's thinking freely in all its forms and manifestations.
Well, they're violating that, it seems like, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, something else the foreign minister said that I think is curious. He said, and I'm reading from this Sputnik News report, that the issue of Assange must be settled through the direct dialogue between the whistleblower's lawyers. Well, is he a whistleblower? Between Assange's lawyers and the authorities of the United Kingdom. So they seem to be, in this sentence, if we could believe this, trying to remove themselves from the whole process. Like, he still has asylum and Ecuador has nothing to do with it. I mean, is that what they're saying?
Well, did they actually use the word whistleblower? Did he use the word?
No, that's the Sputnik writer.
Report.
Yeah, they're not quoting him directly. They're not quoting the foreign minister directly. They're saying that he said that it's up to the Assange's lawyers and the British authorities to determine his status. What does that mean, in your opinion?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if you go back, Moreno said that he will eventually have to leave. That, well, in one way or another. So I guess that what he's probably saying is, the foreign minister is saying, is that safe passage is being obstructed by British authorities. And because they're going to arrest him, we know why they're going to arrest him, because he needs to be in custody so that a sealed indictment can be opened, so he can be extradited without a prima facie case, so that he can be put in detention forever, without trial, even under the NDAA. So there's just a whole list of things that snowball. But the thing is, it has to be negotiated with British authorities, with his lawyers, by his lawyers. But also, one would think also with his prime minister and Australian diplomats. Our prime minister could arrange that very quickly and easily. What is it? Bail breach, right? Right. So, yeah, that was while he was seeking asylum. So it is not a crime to seek asylum while you're, under some kind of legal, bail thing for.
So we can.
You can do that. That's not illegal.
We can interpret that remark then about it's up to the UK authorities and Assange's lawyers to mean that they're ready to expel him. And then it's up to the British authorities to do what they want with him in consultation with Assange's lawyers. I mean, the new foreign secretary said a couple of weeks ago that the British police would have a warm welcome for Julian Assange when he leaves the embassy. So that was a clear indication that they're going to arrest him. So the Ecuadorian foreign minister is saying, okay, it's up to the Brits to determine what they want to do with him. So that doesn't bode very well. It doesn't sound like something to be encouraged by. I think
it was Luke Harding who said that, wasn't it? Luke Harding, the journalist, saying that.
No. That was the new foreign secretary.
Oh, was it? Oh,
Yeah.
right, okay. Because Luke Harding said something
He's probably
very,
said things
very
like that,
similar.
yeah.
Yes,
Worse,
he did.
maybe even worse,
Yes.
Luke Harding, yeah. And more often, most likely. Tell me about the view from Australia since you're there. The Prime Minister, the press there, they almost disowned him as a citizen of Australia. That's what it seems like from outside.
Well, look, I don't know if you heard the interview that I did with Kristinn Assange on the 9th of August. But, it's a 34-minute interview, and it's so informative, and it's bloody heartbreaking as well. But, she said the Australian government has done nothing for Julian. And he only received a visit from 2 diplomats from the Australian High Commission, a couple of months ago. Jennifer Robinson, there were photographs taken, and Jennifer Robinson confirmed that was the first time he'd ever had a visit. So
ever.
There was...
Ever.
Yes, ever. But they've done so much worse than that. At the time that all this stuff happened back in 2011, the Prime Minister was Julia Gillard, and Julia Gillard was a former lawyer. Now, Julia Gillard announced just after Cablegate, announced that what he had done was an illegal, irresponsible thing and an illegal thing. And 10 days later, the Australian Federal Police totally shamed her professionally by saying that he hadn't broken any laws at all.
Any Australian laws anyway, right?
Not in this country, yes.
Yeah.
But as it turned out, not in any country. Well, as far as we know. Since 2010, for the last 8 years. Now, also at the time, a future Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, who is our former Prime Minister, he was his former professions were barrister and then investment banker with Goldman Sachs. But when he was the barrister, he gave a lecture at the University of Sydney denouncing Julia Gillard for being a lousy lawyer and affirmed that Julian Assange had not broken any laws at all. And also, when an Australian citizen is spoken of in this way, indeed threatened in this way, and we're talking about Sarah Palin, we're talking about all of the, assassination incitements back then, an Australian Prime Minister should respond. So he was chastising Gillard for not helping Assange back in 2011, and yet when he became Prime Minister, he didn't do a bloody thing either. It's been, when I was hanging around with some activists back in, I think it was 2012 or 13, we occupied DFAT, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And it was quite an item in the news. But we really wanted some kind of assurance back then that Julian wouldn't be extradited. Otherwise, we weren't going to leave the place. And it was just, it was call security and get them out and just tase them and stuff like that. And we didn't get any answer at all. Don't think that we haven't been active in Australia, trying very hard. There's been enormous amounts that have been done by Australian activists, people like myself as filmmakers, plenty of filmmakers, plenty of people in the street, pretty full-on actions for Julian, especially over a few years, the first few years, and it's coming back now. And, it's like they stick their fingers in their ears and look the other way because, their big brothers are the US and they just don't want to tread on the US's toes. It's been like that for, Jesus, since the Whitlam government in Australia, which is back in the 70s. We've had, American is very, very difficult allies, because they're like your friends with the school bully, you wouldn't say a word against them because they might suddenly turn on you. Although I don't think that's the case, We're very, very useful. It's a two-way thing. But we have bases in Australia that are supposedly joint military facilities, like Pine Gap. And, the big stink was that our Attorney General, Lionel Murphy, back in the 70s, and he was Attorney General under Gough Whitlam, he tried to go in there. Not allowed. Prime Minister not allowed in there. So it was, it was primarily an American base, and even then, the White House knew much more than what people lived.
Well, what would be the political? What would be the political cost for an Australian politician to stand up to the U.S.? Let's say just on the Julian Assange issue, to tell them back off, let alone the Pine Gap and the U.S. bases and the Five Eyes and all of the pressure and the subordination of Australia, along with much of the rest of the world, to the U.S. Just on the Assange issue, how would the population, the voting population, react in Australia if an Australian politician stood up for Julian Assange?
Such an Australian politician has done so. So we've had Senator Scott Ludlam, and he is no longer a senator because there was this big hoo-ha about where people's grandparents were born, so they inherited a dual citizenship that they didn't even know about. And Scott was brought to Australia at a very, very young age, and he didn't know that he had dual citizenship. So being very honest, he and another Green senator, resigned, which was a great loss. It was a great loss because he was our 21st century senator that understood all this, went to Belmarsh to be with Julian, went to Sweden to try and find out what was going on, do some deals, has spoken out. There's plenty of documentation of Scott Ludlam beautifully defended him, and he's been on the vigil. Scott Ludlam, look out for Scott Ludlam. He is the Australian politician who really stood up for Julian. And sadly, I feel that the rest of Australian politicians don't even understand the issues, are not across the whole. Probably a lot of them wouldn't even hardly know what Five Eyes are, especially the regional ones. It's not, people don't understand the importance of freedom of information, which I think this is. It's, for Julian's freedom of expression, because that human right is being denied, but it's essentially a freedom of information issue. We have that. That is a big issue in the world, and that's what WikiLeaks is always. And going right back to Sir Tim Berners-Lee. That's what he wanted with, in giving the internet to the world, that anybody could find out anything they wanted and have a voice,
Now, so it's against the law to be a dual citizen and serve in the Senate in Australia?
Not only the Senate, but just be a member of the government or parliament at all.
And he was a British Australian citizen, is that what it was?
No, New Zealand.
New Zealand. Australia.
and Larissa Waters, another one. She was.
They drove him out. They drove him out. You think because he stood up for Assange, they made the opposition or somebody issue of that?
No, he resigned himself. He was informed by a barrister that his status was as a politician was invalid. He didn't have the right to serve in politics.
When did that become an issue? After he spoke up about Assange, or it was unrelated to that?
Way after. It was just last year.
And you don't think it had anything to do with his defense of Julian Assange? I see.
No, but I spoke to Scott, and he just after he had his farewell party, and I spoke to him, and he said that he'd seen Julian about 3 weeks before. He dropped in to say hello, but that was nothing to do with the WikiLeaks issue. But look, he had a hell of a time, in the Senate. You had Senator George Brandis, who was introducing the metadata retention bill. So, collecting our digital footprint. And Scott was, in the Senate questioning him. This guy who was organizing this, we had this fun event in Sydney called The Meaning of Metadata, because Senator Brandis didn't even know what metadata was, right? That was very embarrassing for him. So Scott, I organised that, and then Scott was the speaker. He came along. We had a lot of fun taunting Brandis, and then the morning of the event, Brandis just released the bill. He just released the law. It just passed into law, and poor Scott was on television all day and didn't have time to prepare his speech. He got him back, but he, I spoke to Scott privately, and I'm not going to say exactly what he said, but he was really exhausted from that struggle.
Is there any difference between the Murdoch press and the rest of the Australian media about the way they portray Julian Assange to the public?
I think there is SBS, which is our international TV station. So I've felt their reporting on Julian to be fair, and actually, good information there. I found the ABC to be terrible, which is, you would think that our national broadcaster would be a little bit more fair and balanced. So they're always getting into trouble from the government, which is right wing at the moment, for not being balanced and impartial. Yes, our Prime Minister recently said, I didn't get at them for being biased. I got that the subject was about their impartiality, so it's exactly the same thing. But yeah, so yeah.
It's not good then. The media coverage is not good across the board.
No, and it's gone a bit the other way with the ABC, unfortunately, because they had an interview with Hillary Clinton. She was interviewed by a journalist called Sarah Ferguson just after her book "What Happened" came out. And in that interview, I think that might have been the first time where she accused the Trump campaign, the Russian state, and WikiLeaks of conspiring to interfere with the 2016 election. That all came out during that interview, and it was totally unchallenged. And there was, a lot of the things that she said, some of them were very, very mendacious. Totally mendacious. Like one of the things that she said in the interview was, why don't they ever report about Russia? Talking about WikiLeaks. And WikiLeaks have brought out over 800,000 documents about Russia. And only 1 month earlier, they had brought out a new release, the Russia spy files, which, of course, Hillary knew about that. But she was pretending to the innocent hobbit Australian viewer that, that WikiLeaks is perennially on Russia's side. They never report about them, and it was just absolutely untrue. And I don't know whether the journalist didn't even realise that it wasn't true. Probably. So incompetence, perhaps. Turning a blind eye. Oh, no, we're getting into trouble if we investigate that. We'll lose our jobs,
Well, exactly. Our career.
It's 11 hours.
This is what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Maintaining their careers and not rocking the boat, which is what a journalist primarily do, rock a boat.
It's a sad day when your national broadcaster turns into compliant media.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Without even realizing they're doing it, perhaps through lack of research, because I was a bit outraged. Nothing went challenged in that interview, and no mention at all of the Podesta emails, for example. Any good that the Podesta releases had done, it was all just channeled into this destructive act. But you guys must be over that now in America. She didn't lose; she was robbed.
over that? Depends of your point of view. The Democrats generally are not over that, no. I think we have Don DeBar, by the way. Cathy, thank you very much for spending half an hour with me and with our audience. And Don DeBar is next up. You are going to interview Don. Let's see if he's online yet. There he is.
There he is.
So Don can unmute his microphone. Then we'll bring him in. Hello, Don, are you there?
Hello.
Hi, Don. How are you doing? I'm going to bow out of this right now. And I'm going to turn it over to Cathy to interview you, Don. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.